Welcome to the deep dive. You brought us a really interesting book today. It's Perry Marshall's 80/20 Sales and Marketing.
Yeah, it's a classic in its field, really.
And the core idea, it's right there in the title, isn't it? Something you, our listeners, are probably familiar with, the 80/20 principle.
The Pareto Principle.
Exactly. That whole idea that, roughly 80% of your results, they tend to come from just about 20% of your efforts.
Or your customers, or your products.
Right. And this deep dive, it's all about how that actually plays out specifically in, well, your business.
Absolutely. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory floating around. No. Marshall's work, it's got endorsements from some really big names in business. People like Dan Kennedy, Chris Belbo.
Oh, wow. Yeah. James Framco, too, right?
James Schramko, exactly. These are folks known for, their sharp understanding of marketing, of entrepreneurship.
So their backing really says something. It highlights the power of the ideas we're going to explore with you today.
It really does.
Okay, so your mission, if you choose to stick with us here, and we think you will, is to really pull out some actionable insights from Marshall's book.
Things you can actually use.
Yeah. Our aim is to equip you with the understanding to maybe work smarter, not necessarily harder.
Make more impact, maybe make more money.
Make more money, yeah. And really zero in on what's truly driving the bulk of your sales and marketing results.
Finding that critical 20%.
Okay, let's dive in. This foundational concept, the 80/20 rule, where does Marshall suggest we start to really get it?
Well, a really key point to grasp right from the beginning is that 80/20 isn't just a one-off thing. It's not like you find it once and you're done.
Okay, so it's repeatable.
Exactly. What's really fascinating is you can apply it again and again and again. Think of it like 80/20 layered on top of itself.
Layered.
Yeah, like 80/20 squared. Or even 80/20 cubed.
80/20 squared. Okay, now we're doing business math.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example, something tangible to show how this layering works?
Sure, yeah. Marshall uses a great analogy. Think about roads and traffic.
Okay, roads and traffic.
He points out that generally about 20% of the roads carry maybe 80% of the traffic. That kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Major highways versus side streets.
Yeah, intuitively, yes.
Okay. But now, if you focus just on that busy 20% of roads, it's likely that roughly 20% of those roads, which is now only 4% of all roads, if you do the math.
Right, 20% of 20%.
That tiny 4% is probably carrying 80% of the traffic that was on the initial 20%.
Whoa.
Which means, if you work it out, just 4% of all the roads could be handling something like 64% of all the traffic.
Wow. That really shows how concentrated things can get. It's not just finding the first 20%, but looking inside that group.
Precisely. You keep drilling down.
So where else does Marshall say we see this pattern showing up, specifically for you, the listener, in a business context?
Oh, he gives a pretty long list, actually. It pops up everywhere. Think about, for your business, where do your calls or inquiries come from? How effective are your different salespeople? Which customers buy the most? Which products are your big sellers?
Right, the best sellers.
Yeah. Even things like product defects, or maybe which employees cause the most headaches.
The problem employees. You all know that one.
Unfortunately, yes.
Right.
Or customer service issues, sources of conflict, even shoplifters in retail.
Really? Shoplifters, too.
Yep. And if you work with distributors or affiliates, their performance almost certainly follows the 80/20 curve. So you should really think about your own situation. Where do you see these kinds of imbalances?
It really does feel like some kind of, I don't know, fundamental law of business outcomes. And it's not just small businesses, right? Doesn't the book show this works on a much bigger scale, too? For your perspective.
Oh, absolutely. Connect this to the global economy. Marshall points out the crazy concentration of wealth.
Okay.
He cites data saying something like 63% of the entire world's wealth is generated by just 10 countries.
10 countries out of how many?
Well, that's only about 5% of all the countries. And if you broaden it slightly, about 80% of global wealth is concentrated in just 22 countries, which is still only around 9% of the total.
That is just staggering concentration. So this pattern is deeply, deeply ingrained.
It seems to be.
And it holds true even when you zoom in more, doesn't it? Like, if you look at the richest people, for your perspective.
Precisely. Marshall really hammers this home. The pattern stays remarkably consistent, whether you're looking at all 7 billion people on Earth or the Forbes 400 list, or even just like the top 10 richest individuals.
The distribution just follows that same steep curve.
Yeah, that disproportionate curve. It just repeats.
Okay. So we've established pretty clearly, I think, that this 80/20 thing is real. It's pervasive, but for you listening, how do we actually use this in your day-to-day sales and marketing?
Right, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Marshall introduces this really vivid concept. He calls it racking the shotgun.
Racking the shotgun. That's evocative. What does he mean?
Think of it like this. Any marketing action you take, anything that triggers some kind of response from your audience,
Okay.
that action helps you identify who's actually interested, who's paying attention to what you offer.
So it's like making some noise, basically. Seeing who looks up.
Exactly, making some noise and seeing who turns their head. Marshall argues that pretty much everything you do with customers, or potential customers,
Like ads, content.
ads, content, emails, website visits, it all acts as racking the shotgun. It's your way of signaling what you do and then watching to see who resonates with that signal.
And he contrasts this with, well, less effective approaches that might be eating up your time, like trying to talk to literally everyone.
Yes, exactly. He uses this analogy of playing poker with every bloke who walked by.
Right. Or the classic dreaded one, cold calling.
Yeah, cold calling fits there too. The point is, by proactively racking the shotgun, you attract prospects who are already leaning your way. They're more likely to be interested. And that's just a much, much better use of your valuable time.
So for you listening, you should think about your current marketing. What actions are you taking that are really racking the shotgun? Getting that clear signal back.
And maybe where are you just kind of broadcasting too widely, wasting effort?
And the benefit for you isn't just finding qualified leads, is it? It's also about how they perceive you right from the start.
Absolutely. When you attract qualified prospects, you naturally spend more of your time having real, meaningful conversations with people who are a good fit.
Makes sense.
And because of that, they tend to respect your time more. They respect your expertise. You're not constantly trying to convince someone who just isn't interested. You're not pushing uphill.
Okay, so you're attracting the right folks. What's next in this process for you? Marshall brings in the power triangle, right?
He does. The power triangle. According to Marshall, this is like the absolute essence of marketing and really almost any human transaction where value gets exchanged.
The essence. Okay, what are the parts?
It's got 3 key elements: traffic, conversion, and economics. And guess what's sitting right in the middle, influencing all of them?
Let me guess. 80-20.
You got it. The 80-20 principle is central to how these 3 interact for you.
All right, let's break those down for you listening. Traffic that seems straightforward. In your context, it's about who you're reaching, who can be your customer.
Exactly. Traffic is the whole pool of people who might potentially buy what you're selling.
Okay, then conversion.
Conversion is all about what you say, how you persuade those people, the right people from your traffic, to actually make a purchase from you.
And the third part, economics.
Economics asks the hard questions. Can you reach these people affordably? And, critically, can they actually give you money? Do they have the means and willingness to pay for what you offer?
Right, the bottom line. And the order you should think about these in, it might not be the obvious one.
That's a really key insight for you. Well, yeah, traffic often comes first when you're doing marketing. Marshall stresses you need to think backward. Start with economics.
Start with the money part.
Yeah, you absolutely need to understand the financial viability first. Who's your ideal customer economically? What can they afford? How much is a customer worth to you? That understanding then dictates how you should approach conversion and traffic.
That makes total sense for your long-term viability. If the numbers don't work at the end, it doesn't matter how much traffic or conversion you get.
Exactly. You'll just go broke efficiently.
And Marshall shares a specific piece of advice, like a mantra, to help you keep this perspective right.
He does. He says you should constantly remind yourself, Perry, you're not you, you're them.
You're not you, you're them. Meaning?
Meaning get out of your own head. Step into your customer's shoes. What are their needs, their desires, their biggest pains? You have to see the world from their perspective, not just your own.
So, okay, you've got the right kind of traffic coming. You're thinking like your customer. How do you further refine who you spend your precious time on? This is where those 5 power disqualifiers come in, right? Yeah? That's crucial for you.
Exactly. These are presented as a really practical tool for you, a way to apply 80-20 directly to your sales process. They help you zero in on, like, the top 1% of prospects.
Real gems.
Yeah, the ones most likely to become great long-term customers for your business.
Okay, let's list them out so you can start applying them. First power disqualifier you need to think about.
First one sounds maybe obvious, but it's fundamental. Do they actually have the money?
Can they afford it?
Simple as that. If a prospect genuinely cannot afford your product or service, No matter how much they like it, they're probably not going to buy. It's a non-starter.
A hard reality check. Okay, what's the second disqualifier you should look for?
Number 2 is, do they have a bleeding neck?
A bleeding neck. That sounds urgent.
It is. It refers to a really critical, urgent problem they absolutely must solve, like right now. Prospects facing that kind of intense pain are way more motivated to buy quickly. Think about your ideal customers. What's their bleeding neck problem that you solve?
That really paints a picture of urgency. Okay, third disqualifier you need to keep in mind when evaluating prospects.
The third is, do they buy into your unique selling proposition, your USP?
Do they get what makes you different? And do they care?
Precisely. Do they understand and value what makes you the better choice compared to all the other options they have?
Makes sense. What's the fourth critical question you need to ask about a prospect?
Number 4, do they actually have the ability to say yes?
Meaning, are you talking to the decision maker?
Exactly. Are you talking to the person who can actually authorize the purchase? Or are you talking to someone who has to go ask their boss or their spouse or a committee?
Huh?
Spending time with someone who can only ever say no or maybe isn't very productive for you.
That's a classic trap, easy to fall into. And finally, the fifth power disqualifier you should consider for your prospects.
The fifth one is, does what you sell actually fit in with their overall plans, their bigger picture?
Awesome.
Well, even if someone has the money, the urgent problem, the authority, if your solution just doesn't align with their broader goals or strategy right now, it's probably not going to become a priority for them. It won't happen.
So the real key for you using these 5 disqualifiers is speed, moving through them quickly.
Absolutely. Marshall really emphasizes this. For you, sales should mostly be a process of disqualification, not just trying to convince everyone.
Slit her out the nose quickly.
Yes, by swiftly identifying who isn't a good fit, you free up your time and energy to focus on the prospects who genuinely are. He even suggests each one of these disqualifiers could potentially filter out, like, the bottom 80% of people you talk to.
Oh.
Think about your last few sales interactions. Which of these might have saved you time if you'd identified them sooner?
Wow, okay. So if you diligently apply all 5, you could theoretically narrow your focus down to less than 1% of your initial contacts. That's 80-20 on steroids for lead qualification.
Pretty much.
Now, you mentioned the unique selling proposition, the USP. The book spends quite a bit of time helping you craft a powerful one, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. Marshall argues that a strong USP is absolutely vital for you. It's how you stand out in a noisy market.
And how you avoid just competing on price, right? Which is usually a race to the bottom.
Exactly. Competing on price alone is often a losing game. A good USP prevents that.
What are some signs for you, listening, that maybe your current USP is a bit weak or underperforming?
He lists several things that might ring a bell for you. Like, are you constantly feeling pressure to drop your prices? Are you always in head-to-head price wars with competitors? Does it feel like competitors just copy you quickly? Is advertising super expensive for you?
Yeah.
Also, if you feel kind of defensive about taking up a prospect's time, or if you have to reach out to tons of people just to get a tiny bit of interest, those are all signs your USP probably needs work. Do any of those sound familiar to you?
Those definitely sound like frustrating and probably expensive situations for a business owner. So what does a good USP look like? What should you aim for? Is there an example from the book?
Yeah, the example Marshall calls the pithiest USP he ever saw was an ad for corn removal. It ran for years in the National Enquirer.
Okay, what did it say?
It just said, corn's gone in 5 days or money back.
That's it?
That's it. Super clear. Addresses a specific pain point directly, and it has a clear, simple guarantee that reduces the risk for the buyer. For you, what's the core, undeniable benefit you offer? Stated that concisely.
Short, direct, manages expectations. Love it. So how do you actually define your own powerful USP for your business? What questions does the book suggest you ask yourself?
Marshall gives you 4 key questions to chew on. First, what is your target market's biggest frustration, their biggest unmet need?
Okay.
Second, why should someone do business with you instead of literally anyone else? All the other options they have.
The core differentiator.
Third, what specific result can your product or service deliver for them that no other product can? What's truly unique? And fourth, what tangible guarantee can you offer them that nobody else in your market is willing or able to match?
Those are really good questions. They force you to think hard from the customer's view and really nail down what makes you different. The book also mentions a natural USP that you kind of just have, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. While your company needs a USP, and maybe specific products do too, You personally also have a USP
as an individual.
as an individual. It's rooted in your own passion, your personality, your unique experiences, kind of the inherent way you do things.
Huh. So your own style and strengths can actually be a competitive advantage that's hard to copy. Interesting. Okay, so you're getting better leads. You have a strong USP.
Yeah.
How do you get those prospects consistently? The book talks a lot about paid traffic, especially Google AdWords, doesn't
It
it?
really does. Marshall calls Google AdWords a tester's dream machine
A dream machine.
because it gives you a highly consistent, highly controllable source of website traffic. That's huge for you. You can bid on the exact keywords your ideal customers are searching for,
Right.
and you can target geographically very precisely, so you reach the most relevant people.
And the real magic, the real power of using a platform like AdWords is your ability to test everything, right? To refine your message constantly.
Precisely. AdWords makes split testing really straightforward. You can test different ad headlines, different descriptions, different calls to action, different landing pages. You run multiple versions at the same time, track the numbers carefully, and you quickly see what works best, what resonates most with your audience. This lets you continuously improve your lead gen, your conversion rates, everything.
The book even lays out a hypothetical scenario, showing how this kind of systematic testing can lead to really big improvements for you, both in leads and actual sales.
Oh, yeah. By methodically testing headlines, offers, page elements, you could realistically aim to double, maybe even triple, your opt-in rates and your sales conversion rates, sometimes quite quickly.
Wow.
That's where putting in that 20% of effort on testing can give you an 80% improvement in results.
And there's this concept he introduces, the unlimited traffic technique. That sounds incredibly powerful if you can pull it off.
It is powerful. It's the strategic idea that if you can monetize traffic better than your competitors.
Meaning make more money per visitor.
Exactly. If you generate more revenue per click than they do, then you can afford to outbid them. You can essentially buy their traffic right out from under them on platforms like Google.
So they find it more profitable just to sell you the click than try to convert it themselves.
In theory, yes,
Ah.
because you're better at turning that click into money.
That's a serious competitive advantage. So Marshall strongly suggests you really focus on mastering Google AdWords first as your main testing ground before branching out.
Absolutely. His argument is because AdWords gives you so much control and such clear, measurable results, it's the perfect place for your initial experiments, for optimization.
Prove the model there first.
Right. Once you've proven your offer, your sales funnel works well on AdWords, then you can take that winning formula and more confidently expand into other channels. Things like, social media, SEO, affiliates, channels that are maybe a bit less directly controllable.
That makes a lot of sense. Focus where you have the most control and the best feedback loops first. Now, the book also introduces something called the power curve. What is that for you to understand, and why is it so important in Marshall's view?
Marshall literally calls the power curve the most important chart in any business. So yeah, it's vital for you to grasp. It's basically just a graph, a visual picture of the 80-20 principle in action.
Okay.
It clearly shows that hugely disproportionate impact that the top performers, whether it's customers, products, salespeople, keywords, have within whatever system you're looking at.
So if you plotted, say, your customers by how much revenue they bring you, the power curve would visually show that small group at the top bringing in most of the money.
Exactly. And it applies to almost anything you can measure in your business. The curve makes it visually obvious where your biggest impact is coming from. And just as importantly, where you might be spending time and resources for very little return, the flat part of the curve.
And there's actually a tool the book mentions for you to see this with your own data.
Yeah, he points people to www.8020curve.com. You can actually plug in your own numbers, sales data, light sources, whatever, and it will generate the power curve specific to your business.
That sounds useful.
He emphasizes that really understanding and then strategically trying to climb your power curve by focusing more on those high-impact activities you identify. That's the key to unlocking really big new opportunities for growth and efficiency.
Okay, so you're focusing more on the vital few things driving the big results. How can you amplify those results even more, especially with your best prospects, your best customers? Guarantees seem to be a big part of this strategy in the book.
Oh, they absolutely are. Marshall is a huge advocate for using bold guarantees. He calls them power guarantees.
Our guarantees.
Yeah. He sees them as an incredibly effective way for you to instantly stand out from competitors and, crucially, to shift the perceived risk of buying away from your customer and onto you.
That makes people feel safer buying from you. He shares a really wild story in the book about a company selling valves for the pharmaceutical industry, right? to illustrate this.
Yes. Tom Hubier's company, Seiko, they made this, well, incredibly bold guarantee. Some would say crazy.
What was
They
it?
sold these expensive tank valves, like $4,000 each. Their guarantee was, if a customer wasn't totally happy, Seiko wouldn't just give a full refund.
Okay, refund is standard.
They would actually pay to replace the Seiko valve with a competitor's valve, which could end up costing Seiko something like $40,000.
$40,000 if their own product failed. That is gutsy. That would definitely get your attention as a buyer.
Wouldn't it just?
But how can any business possibly afford to make a promise like that? It sounds incredibly risky.
Well, Marshall makes a critical connection here. The ability for you to confidently offer a super strong guarantee like that, it links directly back to how well you disqualify prospects up front.
Back to the 5-power disqualifier.
Exactly. If you've done a really good job filtering out the bad fits, the tire kickers, using those disqualifiers we talked about, then you can be much more confident that the customers you do take on are the right ones, the ones you can actually help succeed, which drastically reduces the chance you'll ever need to actually pay out on that big, bold guarantee.
So good qualification makes strong guarantees possible, and strong guarantees attract the right qualified customers. It's a virtuous cycle.
Precisely.
And there's a specific formula he gives, a master formula for a power USP that ties into this guarantee idea.
Yes, he lays it out clearly for you. It goes like this. If you are, and here you clearly define your ideal customer.
Okay, specify who it's for.
And if you, here you specify what they need to do, maybe invest a certain amount, follow a specific process.
They're part of the bargain.
Right. Then you will state the specific measurable result they can expect.
The outcome.
Or else. And that's where you clearly spell out the penalty, the significant risk reversal you take on if they don't get the result.
That formula forces incredible clarity. It defines who you help, what's required, the promised result, and your skin in the game.
Exactly. It leaves very little room for ambiguity.
So if you craft a USP like that, with a really strong guarantee built in, it can actually flip the script, make customers chase you.
That's the ideal outcome. Marshall calls it takeaway selling. Your offer becomes so compelling, so low risk for the right people, that they're the ones actively seeking you out. You're not chasing them anymore.
That sounds like a much better position to be in.
Yeah.
Now, all this seems to point towards, well, exponential effects. The book talks about how 80/20 has this kind of exponential quality because of feedback loops and systems. Can you unpack that for us? How does that work for you to understand?
Sure. Marshall explains that 80/20 is so powerful, partly because of how chaos and positive feedback work together in complex systems.
Chaos and feedback loops.
Yeah. He uses the Grand Canyon as a really great analogy.
The Grand Canyon. How does that relate?
Well, think about it. It started as basically flat rock, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then water started flowing. Maybe it found just a tiny, tiny initial path, a slight depression.
Okay.
That tiny channel made it just a little bit easier for the next bit of water to flow down the exact same path.
Right, gets reinforced.
Exactly. That's positive feedback. That initial, maybe random small advantage gets amplified. More water flows, cuts the channel deeper, which makes it easier for even more water to flow there, and so on over millions of years.
Until you get the Grand Canyon with
Yeah.
a tiny initial advantage.
Precisely. This cycle small advantage leads to positive feedback, which amplifies the advantage, leads to those massive disproportionate results over time.
So those little edges, the things that work just slightly better, can really snowball because of these self-reinforcing loops.
Absolutely. And what's also cool is this idea of self-similarity.
Self-similarity.
Yeah. The patterns repeat at different scales. The way water carves the Grand Canyon is kind of similar fundamentally to how water makes channels in a muddy puddle in your backyard after rain.
Huh. Macro reflects micro.
Exactly. And the same applies to your business. If you consciously focus your energy, your resources on the things that are already working, even just a little bit, you create a positive feedback loop that amplifies those initial successes. You make the strong stronger.
That's a really powerful way to think about focus. Now, shifting gears a bit, the book also applies 80/20 to something we all deal with, time management. How does that work for you?
Yeah, Marshall takes the power curve idea and applies it directly to how you use your time.
Okay.
He points out that even someone earning, say, minimum wage probably has moments, maybe brief ones, where their work, their input is potentially worth way more. Maybe for a few minutes, their contribution could be valued at like $1,000 an hour if it solves a critical problem or unlocks a big opportunity.
So even in a low-value job overall, there are high-value spikes.
Exactly. Everyone has these potential high-value moments. The key for you is to first recognize them and then figure out how to spend more of your time operating at that higher level.
So the goal for you is to kind of climb the time power curve.
That's exactly the phrase he uses, climb your time power curve. How? By strategically delegating or just eliminating the low-value tasks, the stuff anyone could do, the $10 an hour work,
Freeing you up for.
freeing up your time and, just as importantly, your mental energy to focus on your specific talent zone.
Big talent zone.
Yeah. Those activities that you naturally do really, really well, probably much better than most other people, where you create the most value almost effortlessly.
And the book actually suggests a practical way for you to figure out what your talent zone is.
It does. He recommends you conduct what he calls a unique capability survey.
Okay. How does that work?
It's pretty simple, actually. You reach out to maybe 5 friends, colleagues, people who know you well professionally, and you ask them one direct question. What is my unique capability? What do I naturally do significantly better than most people you know?
Oh, that's a bold question to ask.
It is. But the answers, the recurring themes that come back from people who know you well, can give you incredibly valuable clues about your true inherent strengths, where you should be focusing your energy for maximum impact.
That's a really actionable exercise. Could lead to some real self-awareness.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side of focusing on the top 20%, the book has a chapter with a pretty blunt title, something like Fire the Bottom 10%, right?
Yep. That's the one.
That sounds harsh.
Yeah.
What's the thinking behind that? Maybe uncomfortable advice for you?
Well, while it might sound harsh initially, Marshall makes a pretty strong case. He argues that often the bottom 10%, whether it's your customers or your employees, end up consuming a hugely disproportionate amount of your time, your energy, your
The
resources.
squeaky wheels that drain you.
Exactly. And worse, they might actually be holding back the overall performance and growth of your entire business.
So the idea for you is you have to prune the unhealthy parts to let the healthy parts grow better.
Pretty much. He emphasizes that making that tough call, firing underperforming employees, or even strategically firing really difficult, resource-draining customers.
Firing customers.
Yeah, the ones who constantly complain, demand endless attention, maybe treat your staff badly, and don't actually contribute much to the bottom line.
Okay.
Firing them, he argues, is sometimes necessary for the health and growth of your business. It frees up those resources so you can focus on your best customers, your best employees. He even shares a story about having to ask a really disruptive, demanding attendee to leave one of his seminars because they were mistreating his staff.
Wow. That takes guts, but I can see how it could improve things dramatically for everyone else.
Yeah.
Okay, moving to a slightly different application. How does 80-20 show up in markets that are really polarized? Divided.
Yeah. In markets with strong polarization, think politics, maybe certain social issues, Marshall describes something called a saddle curve.
A saddle curve, like on a horse.
Kind of. Imagine two 80-20 curves back to back, mirrored. So you have high activity or passion at both extremes and a dip in the middle.
Okay, so the action is at the pole.
Exactly. In these situations, you often find that a relatively small but very vocal minority at each end tends to dominate the conversation. They have way more influence than the larger, but maybe more apathetic or quiet, majority in the middle.
So in that kind of polarized environment, taking a really clear, strong stance on one side, that could actually be a good strategy for you to attract a specific group.
Yes, potentially. By clearly and maybe even passionately aligning your brand or your message with one side of that divide, you can definitely capture the attention and the loyalty of people who strongly identify with that viewpoint. It can be a faster way to build a dedicated following within that specific segment. Cut through the noise.
But the book adds a note of caution, right, about not getting too, I don't know, arrogant or closed-minded, even if you take a side.
Absolutely. While taking a firm stance can work in these markets, Marshall warns against letting that turn into, unproductive arrogance or just completely refusing to even try to understand the other side's perspective. A little intellectual humility is still valuable.
Good point. Now, before you jump into any market, the book really hammers home the need to validate demand first. Don't build something nobody wants.
Critically important. Yes.
And it actually outlines a method for doing what it calls 80-20 market research in a single afternoon. How can you do research that fast?
Marshall credits a Dr. Glenn Livingston for developing these super efficient research techniques. The core idea for you is to quickly tap into all the information that's already out there online.
Eavesdrop on the existing conversations.
Exactly. Find out what your potential customers are already talking about. What are their biggest frustrations, their unmet needs? What language do they use to describe their problems? You don't have to guess.
Okay, so what tools or techniques does this involve for you? How do you do this quick research?
It involves using several online tools strategically. You use Google for keyword research, see what people are actually searching for, how many of them are searching.
Okay.
You dive deep into customer reviews on sites like Amazon, goldmine of pain points and desires there.
Ah, the reviews.
Watch relevant YouTube videos, but pay close attention to the comments. See what people are saying, arguing about.
Mm-hmm.
Use specialized blog search tools like the old blog search or Technorati were to find articles and, again, read the comments. And finally, set up Google alerts for key terms to monitor the ongoing conversation in your target market.
So it's all about listening, gathering the actual words your potential customers use.
Precisely. You gather that language, then you apply 80-20 to it. Look for the 20% of comments or reviews or posts that show the most passion, the most engagement, the most emotion.
Find the hot spots.
Find the hot spots. That tells you where the energy is, where the market gaps might be, what the most motivated customers really care about. Marshall also suggests maybe reaching out directly to a few potential customers and asking 3 key questions.
What are those?
Basically, what's your biggest challenge related to X? How urgent is it for you to solve this? And what have you already looked for or tried that didn't work? Helps you gauge need, urgency, and existing solutions.
That sounds like a really smart, fast way for you to get a reality check on a market before you invest heavily. Okay, so you validated your market, you have a product. Now the book talks about optimizing for maximum impact, using an analogy about doubling squares. What's that about for your business?
Yeah, the doubling squares analogy is simple but powerful. Imagine you have a big square and a small square. If you double the side length of both squares,
Okay.
the area of the big square increases by a much, much larger amount than the area of the small square.
Right. Area side squared?
Exactly. The point is, applying the same effort, doubling the side to a bigger starting point yields a much bigger result. So for your business, focusing your optimization efforts on the parts that are already high impactfully, your big squares.
Mm-hmm.
That will give you far greater overall improvement than trying to optimize the small stuff, the areas with little impact.
So identify your big levers and focus your improvement efforts there. Don't sweat the small stuff quite as much.
Precisely. Marshall suggests that optimizing just the most important 5% of your business process could potentially yield something like a 50% improvement in your overall results.
Wow, 5% drives 50%. That's leverage.
That's the idea. And he also emphasizes a specific sequence for your optimization efforts. Don't just optimize randomly.
What's the sequence?
First, optimize traffic generation, get the right people coming in. Then optimize conversion, turn more of those right people into customers. And then finally, optimize the economics, things like lifetime value, cost per acquisition, etc.
Traffic, then conversion, then economics. That logical flow makes perfect sense for building sustainable growth. Okay, another concept. RFM, recency, frequency, monetary value. Described as the 3D 80-20 of profitable marketing. What does this framework give you for understanding customers better?
RFM is a really powerful lens for you to look at your customer base. It helps you prioritize where to focus your marketing attention based on 3 key things about each customer's behavior.
Okay, what are they?
Recency. How recently did they last buy from you or engage with you? Frequency. How often do they typically buy or engage? And monetary value. How much money have they spent with you overall?
Recency, frequency, monetary value, RFM. So a customer who bought yesterday, buys every month, and has spent thousands, they'd be a top RFM customer for you.
Exactly. That's your superstar customer, most likely. Marshall points out, unsurprisingly, that a small percentage of your customers, your top RFM segment, probably generates the vast majority of your revenue. 80-20 again. So, by segmenting your customer list based on RFM scores, you can get much smarter with your marketing. You can give special offers, maybe more attention to your best customers, nurture those relationships.
And maybe communicate differently with less engaged segments.
Precisely. You tailor the message and maybe even the frequency of communication to match their level of engagement. Don't blast everyone the same way.
And the book mentions some specific services or experts that could help you with this kind of deeper RFM analysis.
Yeah, he mentions services like Crystallytics and also the data mining work of Brian Woodruff as resources that can help you dig into your customer data, find these hidden 80/20 patterns using RFM, and even potentially predict who's likely to buy next.
That sounds incredibly useful for targeted marketing.
Oh.
Okay, now, the whole 80/20 principle, by its nature, highlights inequality in results. Things aren't distributed evenly. The book touches on how this sometimes bumps up against the ideal of equality, doesn't it?
It does. It's an interesting point. Marshall acknowledges this apparent tension. You have the 80/20 reality outcomes are rarely equal, clashing with the deeply held ideal of equality, like you see in the U.S. Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal.
He even brings in an example from Amazon reviews, the 3-star rating thing.
Yeah, he notes how in some markets, especially passionate ones, you see hyper-responsive customers clustering at the extremes, tons of 5-star reviews and tons of 1-star reviews, with fewer in the middle, another kind of polarized distribution.
And he references Alexis de Tocqueville's observations about America.
Right. Tocqueville, writing way back in the 1830s, saw equality and individualism as these twin driving forces in American society.
And Tocqueville traced that idea of equality back even further, didn't he?
Yeah, interestingly, Tocqueville traced the roots of this powerful idea of equality all the way back to St. Paul in the 1st century. Paul's radical teaching that in Christ there is no Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female, all were equal in that spiritual sense.
A revolutionary idea for that time.
Absolutely.
So the book suggests that maybe we should view equality as more of a foundational, perhaps spiritual value, rather than an expectation of equal outcomes.
That seems to be Marshall's interpretation, drawing on Tocqueville, that equality is this crucial spiritual or philosophical value that underpins a just political system, even while we observe that in the real world of results and achievements, 80/20 distributions, inherent inequalities of outcomes seem to be the norm.
That's definitely a thought-provoking way to frame it. Now, bringing it back to personal application for your listening, the book encourages you to find your own twist-the-dials moments. What's that about?
Marshall shares a bit of his own story, how he struggled in business for a while until he realized his own unique gift, his talent zone, was something he calls system acceleration.
System acceleration.
Yeah. The ability to look at a system, a business process, a marketing funnel, and spot the small changes, the little tweaks, the dials you can twist that will produce disproportionately large improvements in the results.
Finding those high leverage points. He gives examples of helping nonprofits and political campaigns achieve huge breakthroughs with seemingly minor changes, right?
Exactly, like adding just a couple of sentences and a pre-addressed envelope to a thank you letter, which massively boosted donations for a nonprofit. Or making one small change to how donor pledges were fulfilled for a political campaign, again with huge results.
Tiny changes, massive impact.
That's the essence of it. So he urges you to actively look for your own areas of unique leverage. Where can you make small adjustments that yield big returns? Focus your energy there. He even mentions a technique he calls easy conversation to make client meetings more focused and productive.
It's about finding those small hinges that swing big doors for you. Finally, the book mentions the king effect, anomalies at the very top of the power curve. What's that?
Yeah, the king effect is where the absolute top performer, or maybe the top few, in a category can just blow everyone else away.
Yeah.
They outperform even what the standard 80/20 curve would predict. They create these big spikes, these anomalies right at the very top.
Can you give an example?
Marshall uses the classic example of Michael Jordan's salary back when he played for the Chicago Bulls. It was vastly, vastly higher than any of his teammates, even the other stars. That huge outlier salary is a king effect. He also briefly mentions Zipf's law as a related idea about these kinds of distributions.
So the very, very top end of the curve might not always follow the smooth 80/20 pattern perfectly.
Exactly. That's the main takeaway from you. While 80/20 is a super useful model overall, the extreme top end, and sometimes the extreme bottom end too, can be a bit less predictable, a bit less practical to analyze sometimes because of these king effects or other weird anomalies.
Well, this has been a really, really insightful deep dive into Perry Marshall's 80/20 sales and marketing. It seems so clear that if you really grasp this core principle and start applying it strategically,
It gives you a powerful new lens.
yeah, a lens to analyze your business, to focus your limited time and money where it counts the most, and ultimately, yeah, achieve way more with less wasted effort.
Absolutely. And the crucial thing now for you listening is to not just hear this, but to do something with it. Identify just one thing, maybe 2 key takeaways from our chat today that you can actually put into action.
Start somewhere small, maybe.
Start somewhere, apply one idea, see what happens.
So maybe take a moment right now to consider this. Where are the biggest but maybe hidden leverage points in your own work right now, in your business, your projects? What small dials could you potentially twist starting tomorrow that might unlock some of those big, disproportionate results you're looking for?
It's a powerful question to ask yourself.
It really is, and we definitely encourage you to explore these ideas further. Maybe check out that website, www.8020curve.com, or look into the other resources mentioned in the book excerpts if you want to go even deeper.
The learning doesn't have to stop here.
Definitely not. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.